Outlast 2 is coming very soon, and the media is hyping it to be the next big thing in the survival horror genre. I heard a lot about Outlast before, but never got the chance to play it though, a mistake that I just corrected, and I'm happy to say that this game is actually not that good. First of all, this video is not about Outlast. It's not about any specific game actually. This video is about the survival horror genre as a whole, its origin, its evolution, and its mutation to the modern hide-and-seek simulation. I'm also going to criticize some very popular games, but I really don't intend to offend anybody. It's just my opinion after all, and if you don't agree with me, that's fine. To understand why I'm unhappy and disappointed about games like Outlast, Amnesia, and Slenderman, we have to define first what is a survival horror game. And who's better to give us this definition than the man who himself created it? In an interview with Game Informer, Shinji Mikami, the creator of Resident Evil and The Evil Within, defines the survival horror genre by saying, "To me, the definition of survival horror is a game where fear and the sense of exhilaration coincide." And he adds, "Balancing horror and fun certainly is a huge challenge. From player speed versus horror, darkness versus level of visibility, spacing of save points versus risk of retries and player motivation, the amount of ammunition versus horror, as well as considering the player's playstyle. There were so many things to account for simultaneously. And I can't agree anymore. The classic survival horror games were and still are a lot of fun to play in addition to being very scary, at least some of them. Yet a lot of people seem to think that they were scary only because they had fixed camera angles. And it's pointless to go back to this feature because it's old and it became obsolete. While it's true that fixed camera angles limited the visibility for the player and provoked in him the fear of the unknown, I don't think the camera was the only reason for that. We have to remember that fixed camera angles were used as a necessity due to the hardware limitations of the time in the first place. There are other common features in these games that made them what they were, like the tank controls that limited the movements of the characters, making them vulnerable, and the scarce ammo and healing objects that emphasize exploring the environment in search of them, and made you think twice before using any of these items. And there is the backtracking, that many may consider it annoying, but I think it was used cleverly in these games, making the player traverse the same corridor many times until he gets used to it and starts feeling comfortable, and then surprise him with an unexpected element. It's always very effective. But that's not all. In addition to these common features, I think that each one of the classic survival horror games had its own mechanics to scare people. For instance, Resident Evil had some tough decisions making. Should you use your last clip to kill that zombie that blocks the way? But you don't know what awaits you behind the door. It could be a hunter, or worse, it could be a boss, or nothing, who knows? Or you probably should save your bullets and then risk getting bitten or even dying, knowing that there is no checkpoints and your last save took place more than 1 hour ago. The save system was a tough decision as well. It wasn't unlimited and you have to think strategically before each save. It was this decisions making that made the game so stressful and scary. A wrong decision means being punished by death, and death means restarting from the last save, if there is a last save. Moving to Silent Hill, its scare tactics were more psychological. I'm not just talking about the use of the fog or the darkness to create this crushing feeling of claustrophobia, which was done very well by the way, but I'm talking more about the use and the perversion of everyday objects in a way to unsettle the player, making him constantly feel uneasy. And there is the soundtrack. The originality of Eternal Darkness is that it based its scares for the most part on the fourth wall breaking. The game had a sanity meter that decreases whenever your character takes damage. When it's too low, the game starts playing tricks on you. And by you, I mean the player, not the character. Some of these tricks are just genius and terrifying. The Siren series may not be as famous as the other survival horror games, but they are just as scary and definitely harder. It's a series that emphasizes stealth, but not amnesia or Outlast stealth, mind you. You can actually fight back in these games and even kill the Shibitos, but they don't stay dead for too long. That's why it's better to avoid them. And here where things become interesting. The game lets you use a feature called the sidejack, which gives you the possibility to see through the enemy's eyes. This way, you can tell where they are lurking and avoid crossing their path. It's a great example of a stealth mechanic done right in a horror game. You have more options than just hiding in a locker and waiting for whatever is chasing you to go away. And there is nothing scarier in Siren than sidejacking a Shibito to see your protagonist's back. And finally, my favorite survival horror series of all time. Fatal Frame had a lot of ways to scare people, but its most effective way was its combat system. You see, to defeat the many ghosts that haunt the game, you're given a special camera called the camera obscura, and you basically need to take picture of them. But here's the trick. If you want to deal the maximum damage to the ghosts, you have to wait for the perfect moment, which is generally the time when the ghost is about to attack you. Then you can execute the fatal frame and hurt the ghost pretty badly. The timing is crucial, and if you miss, it's you who will take a lot of damage. It's that risk and reward aspect that made the combats in Fatal Frame so much fun to this day. And the fact that the game rewards you for enduring the look and the sound of the ghost in order to achieve the Fatal Frame is just awesome. Those were just a few examples of the many classic survival horror games. There are still a lot of other good games to talk about. After all, the PS2 generation was the golden age of the survival horror. At that time, this genre was as popular as first-person shooters are popular today. Then came Resident Evil 4, and everything changed. Talking about Resident Evil 4 is a tricky matter. Many people, including myself, consider it as one of the best games of all time. But it's also accused for initiating the mutation of survival horror into action shooters. The game had flawless gameplay, at least for the time. Its major innovation was replacing the fixed camera by the over-the-shoulder view. It was a revolutionary mechanic that is still used in modern action third-person shooters. And it was so good that the games that came after Resident Evil 4 adopted this feature and ignored anything related to the horror aspect. Resident Evil 4 was indeed an action-oriented game, but it also had a creepy atmosphere and many horror elements. But those elements were lacking in both its sequels. Both Resident Evil 5 and 6 were pure action games, and tried to appeal to Call of Duty fans more than survival horror fans. They were a lot of fun to play maybe, but had zero horror to enjoy. Thus began a dark age for the survival horror. Although some games tried to revive the genre, like Condemned, an excellent survival horror game that unfortunately got a disappointing sequel, or Dead Space, which did got a very good sequel actually, but fell to the temptation of action in its third installment and followed the steps of Resident Evil 5 and 6 by becoming a generic shooter as well. The damage was already done. With the lack of new titles and disappointing sequels in the survival horror genre, a new phenomenon started to show up. Some small indie games, which most of them were free, began to fill up the void and quickly gained popularity, especially among YouTubers. These games weren't very long and had a rudimentary gameplay. Seeing the rise of this trend, some companies started to mimic these games, minus the free-to-play side of course, and they were a huge success as well. I don't know if people are so lacking good survival horror games, or if they never played one before that made them jump blindly on these games with no sense of criticism. Seriously, why everybody insists to call them survival horror games? They are not. They are neither fun to play nor scary to experience. Why? Well, these games have this annoying tendency to forget that they are actually games. Let me explain. Sure, they have some horror elements, but that doesn't make them fit for the survival horror genre. You can't just make your game dark, gory and full of jump scares and call it a survival horror game. Where is the freaking gameplay? These games, they barely have any. Some of them are more fit to be bonus stages than games on their own. In addition, they have forgettable stories, which are told only through notes, making it hard to understand the plot of the game when you miss some of these notes, and they are easy to miss. The classic survival horror games had notes and collectibles too, but they weren't mandatory to understand the story. They had many cutscenes and dialogues between memorable characters for that purpose. The last point is the overuse of this plague called the jump scares. And for some reason, people seem to believe that this is how survival horror games are supposed to be. Just like in movies, I hate jump scares. It's a big signal of the lack of creativity and imagination. It's not scary, it's annoying. Outlast, for example, based its entire game on the overuse of gore and jump scares. None of these elements is scary for me. The only time when I was terrified in this game is during this scene. It's math! Seriously, if gore and jump scares are enough to make your game scary, then Mortal Kombat should be the scariest game of all time. Besides, they are all scripted for the most part, meaning that they have no effect during a second playthrough. And when you base your entire game on cheap jump scares instead of a fun gameplay, you will lose all replay value. That is, if you succeeded to engage the player till the end of the game during his first playthrough, of course. But I guess when you have no worthy gameplay to engage players with, you don't really have a choice, do you? So to sum up, if you want to make a survival horror game these days, first you need to make it either very dark so players can't really see how basic if not terrible the graphics are, or in the contrary, make the graphics very pretty and hope that the beauty of the game will make them forget anything about the gameplay. Then, if you still think that gameplay is important, add a super annoying feature like a torch that barely lit anything, and or uses batteries made by the most deceitful company in the world. This way you can say that the game has some gameplay in it. Third point, make sure that the protagonist is worse than a scared little girl who can only run and hide. No need to add any combat or self-defense mechanics. And finally, put the whole thing in first-person view so you can easily throw all your stupid jump scares at the player's face. And because it's cheaper to produce, you don't have to create any model or animation for your main protagonist. I think that the survival horror is stuck between two different types of games, with a very thin line between each one of them. In one side there is the generic super annoying action games that most of our beloved franchises have fell into it. And when the developers are too afraid for their games to suffer the same fate, or let's be honest, just too lazy, they remove all kind of combat mechanics and content with minimal gameplay, reducing the whole concept of a video game to a walk-in or hide-and-seek simulation. I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a thumbs up if you did, and why not consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.